This story is shared on Sci-Fi World and follows Adrian as he navigates danger, instinct, and trust at an alien royal court. The first thing Adrian learned about the celestial court was that it smelled wrong. Not unpleasant exactly, but layered. Ozone from the energy lattice in the ceiling, sweet resin from alien flora woven into the walls, and beneath it all the faint metallic note of something recycled too many times. Air, like power, was never truly fresh here. He stood at the edge of the grand hall, adjusting the collar of a uniform that still felt borrowed, watching nobles drift past as if gravity treated them differently. He had been appointed 3 days ago, which was apparently long enough for everyone to assume he knew what he was doing. Adrian disagreed. His official title, Nutritional Integrity Examiner, sounded impressive until one realized it meant the person who dies first. He tried not to think about that as the hall filled with light. Literal light. Bioluminescent panels bloomed along the arches, responding to the presence of royalty, bathing the room in pale gold. Queen Erys entered without ceremony, which somehow made it ceremonial. She moved with practiced stillness, tall, composed, her long ears sweeping back from her head like elegant punctuation marks. They marked her as alien, unmistakably so, yet the rest of her could have passed for human. Sharp eyes, controlled expression, the faintest suggestion of amusement or exhaustion, impossible to tell which. Adrian bowed a fraction too late and compensated by bowing too deeply, nearly headbutting a passing server. The banquet began with the precision of a launch sequence. Dishes floated forward on anti-grav trays, each one a minor miracle of molecular cuisine. Proteins folded into impossible geometries, vegetables grown in zero-light chambers, sauces engineered to stimulate memory centers. Adrian tasted, scanned, and swallowed, his wrist implant humming softly as it analyzed compounds faster than his brain ever could. Everything read clean. Of course it did. Poison, if it came, would not announce itself. He told himself jokes to stay calm. If he survived the night, he would demand hazard pay. If he didn't, at least the uniform would finally fit someone else. He watched Queen Erys from the corner of his vision, noting how she listened more than she spoke, how nobles laughed just a second too quickly at her remarks. The court was a machine built on smiles, and Adrian had always been bad at pretending machines were friendly. Then the dish arrived. It looked harmless. Too harmless. A pale spiral of steamed synth grain and cultured saffron, crowned with a translucent glaze that caught the light beautifully. Adrian leaned in, inhaled, and frowned. His implant gave no alert. His training gave no answer. But his stomach tightened, and a memory surfaced uninvited. His mother pulling his hand away from spoiled food when he was a child, saying, "If it smells wrong, don't argue with it." Queen Erys lifted the dish. Time slowed in the dramatic way Adrian had always assumed was exaggerated in holovids. He could hear the hum of the ceiling lattice, the soft clink of jewelry, his own heartbeat doing an unprofessional sprint. He considered protocol. He considered treason. He considered how much he liked being alive. "Don't eat that food!" The words echoed across the hall, louder than he intended, louder than was wise. Conversations collapsed into silence. Guards moved instantly, efficient and annoyed, hands on weapons that hummed with restrained force. Adrian felt himself being grabbed, his feet barely touching the floor as he was dragged backward. Somewhere, a noble gasped theatrically. Somewhere else, someone dropped a fork. Queen Erys froze. The dish hovered inches from her lips. Adrian's last coherent thought before the guards tightened their grip was that, if he died, at least it wouldn't be from bad cooking. Adrian decided as he was being hauled through a side corridor by two very serious guards that treason felt a lot like indigestion, only with better lighting. The hallway walls pulsed softly as they passed, reacting to motion, displaying court insignias and historical holograms that Adrian did not have time to appreciate. One of the guards smelled faintly of ozone, in disappointment. "I'd like to formally note," Adrian said, partly because silence made his thoughts louder, "that I did not touch the Queen. I did not insult the Queen, and I did not, to my knowledge, explode anything." "Be quiet," the guard on his left replied, which seemed unfair given how many people had been talking moments earlier. They deposited him in a holding chamber that looked less like a dungeon and more like an over-designed meditation pod. The door sealed with a sigh, and Adrian was alone with a hovering light orb that clearly did not trust him. He sat, tested the bench, and waited. If execution was imminent, it was being handled with remarkable calm. Minutes passed, or seconds. Time behaved strangely when one's career had ended so loudly. Back in the grand hall, Queen Erys had not moved. The dish still hovered where she had left it, her fingers steady, her expression unreadable. Court protocol demanded outrage, punishment, spectacle. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, her long ears angling forward, a subtle sign of attention few outside her species recognized. "Analyze it," she said. The command rippled outward. Court scientists activated scanning arrays, nanosamplers descending like curious insects. Nobles shifted, some relieved, others irritated by the interruption to their evening. The guards holding Adrian received a silent signal through their implants and hesitated, uncertain. That hesitation saved his life. The results came quickly, too quickly. The glaze contained a compound that broke down into benign elements after ingestion, leaving behind symptoms indistinguishable from natural organ failure. Elegant, patient, designed by someone who knew both biology and politics. A poison that wanted credit from no one. The hall did not erupt, it stiffened. Queen Erys lowered the dish, her gaze sweeping the room. Adrian was brought back, less roughly this time, and placed before her like an unexpected footnote. He resisted the urge to bow again. Once per near-death experience felt sufficient. "You shouted," Erys said, her voice calm, "without evidence." "Yes, your radiance," Adrian replied. "I'd like to clarify that this is not a habit. I usually keep my opinions internal." "And yet you were correct." Adrian smiled weakly. "I've been told my instincts are inconveniently accurate." A few nobles scoffed. One looked pale. Erys noticed everything. She dismissed the court with a gesture that allowed no argument. When the hall emptied, the silence felt heavier than before, dense with implications. "You have no training in counter-assassination," she said. "No," Adrian agreed. "My specialty is eating questionable meals and hoping science works faster than poison." Erys studied him, curiosity now openly present. "Then you will do so closer to me." That was how Adrian became the Queen's personal food taster. Not with a ceremony, but with an order delivered as casually as one might request more tea. His holding chamber became temporary quarters. His uniform was upgraded, his implant permissions expanded alarmingly fast. He was escorted everywhere, not as a prisoner, but as an asset. An oddly shaped, anxiety-prone asset with a talent for surviving poor decisions. Their first private meal was tense. Adrian sampled, waited, and nodded. "This one is safe," he said. "Also excellent. Whoever made it is either loyal or confident." Erys raised an eyebrow. "You joke." "I cope," Adrian replied. "It's that or scream." Something like amusement flickered across her face. Outside, the celestial court resumed its rhythms, but the machine had been disturbed. Somewhere within its polished corridors, someone had failed. And someone else, unexpected, human, inconvenient, had noticed. Adrian ate carefully, aware that every bite now mattered more than ever. Adrian learned quickly that being close to power did not make it quieter. It made it louder in subtler ways. Every corridor near the Queen's private wing carried whispers embedded in the walls. Data streams, security pings, diplomatic traffic sliding through invisible channels. The palace was thinking all the time, and now, unfortunately, so was he. His new position placed him exactly 3 steps behind Queen Erys during public appearances. The distance was ceremonial, calculated to imply trust without equality. Adrian found it mostly inconvenient. 3 steps was far enough to trip if he walked too fast and close enough to hear her sigh when another noble spoke for too long. Meals became events within events. Adrian tasted first, always. Sometimes twice. His implant ran constant analysis, updating threat models that grew increasingly pessimistic. Poison, it turned out, was only one option among many. There were nanites that misfired organs, resonance fields that disrupted neural rhythms, bacteria that behaved politely until instructed otherwise. Science, Adrian reflected, had made murder very creative. Queen Erys watched him work with open interest. She asked questions, not the kind meant to trap, but the kind that suggested genuine curiosity. Why did he hesitate before swallowing? Why did he pause longer with certain scents? Adrian answered honestly, which surprised both of them. "I don't trust perfection," he said once, after rejecting a dish that scanned clean. "Real food has opinions. This one feels too agreeable." She laughed then, a brief sound, quickly contained. It startled him more than the assassination attempt. Queens, in his limited experience, were not supposed to laugh at food tasters. Court life pressed in around them. Advisors offered strategies. Counselors praised vigilance. Everyone agreed it was a tragedy narrowly avoided. Everyone had suggestions. Adrian noticed that no one asked him how he knew. That absence bothered him more than attention would have. He filled the silence with commentary. He made quiet remarks about nobles who flinched at scanners, about servers who avoided eye contact, about how the palace security system was impressive but had the personality of an anxious librarian. Queen Erys listened. Sometimes she corrected him, sometimes she did not. Slowly, impossibly, a rhythm formed. One evening, after a particularly elaborate tasting that involved a dessert still partially alive, Adrian wiped his mouth and said, "If this kills me, tell history I died bravely and slightly annoyed." "You will not die tonight," Erys replied. "That's what worries me," he said. "Statistically speaking." She studied him, her long ears relaxed, unguarded in a way she never allowed in public. "You are not afraid of me," she said. Adrian considered lying. He did not. "I am," he said, "just not in the way people expect." That answer lingered between them. Outside the dining chamber, the court adjusted. Smiles sharpened. Alliances shifted by degrees too small to notice, unless one was looking. Adrian was looking, not because he wanted power, but because power had started trying to kill the person standing in front of him. Queen Erys rose, signaling the end of the meal. Adrian followed, already mentally cataloging the next risks. He realized, with a mix of humor and unease, that he had stopped thinking of her as an abstract figure. She was no longer just the queen. She was the person he needed to keep alive tomorrow. The fourth day after the banquet began with tea, which Adrian had already learned was never just tea. The liquid shimmered faintly as it settled in the cup, responding to ambient electromagnetic fields, and his implant immediately began its quiet, judgmental hum. He stared at it for a long moment before tasting, as if daring it to accuse him of something. "Well?" Queen Erys asked, seated across from him at a small table that looked deceptively informal for something that could probably survive orbital bombardment. "It's safe," Adrian said after a moment, "but it's watching me." Erys's lips curved. "The leaves are semi-sentient. They calm the nervous system." "Good," Adrian replied, "because mine has been filing complaints." They had moved their investigations into smaller spaces, away from the public halls. The palace adjusted accordingly. Walls reconfigured, corridors rerouted, surveillance nodes bloomed and retracted like mechanical flowers. Adrian found it unsettling how easily the environment adapted to paranoia. He wondered how often it had done this before. As he ate and drank on her behalf, patterns began to emerge, not in the food itself, but in the timing. Certain advisors appeared only at certain meals. Some ceremonial dishes were insisted upon by tradition, pushed forward with smiles too polished to be sincere. Adrian started keeping notes, mostly in his head, occasionally muttering them aloud when he forgot himself. "That one flinched," he said once, nodding subtly toward a departing counselor. Erys did not look. "When?" "When the scanner passed over the tray. Very slight, like he expected it to beep. Or hoped it would," she said. They shared a look. It was not the kind of look rulers and employees were meant to share. It was conspiratorial, edged with the strange intimacy of two people noticing the same crack in the same wall. Humor became a tool. Adrian used it to diffuse tension when the silence pressed too hard. He compared assassination attempts to poorly written recipes. He suggested rating nobles on a scale from probably harmless to definitely poisons dessert. Erys responded with dry observations that were almost jokes if one listened closely enough. "You are difficult to intimidate," she said at one point. "I grew up with older siblings," Adrian replied. This is familiar. As days passed, the court grew restless. Whispers thickened. Security increased. Adrian felt it in the way guards' grips tightened, in the way servers double-checked orders that had already been approved. The machine was straining, and machines, he knew, broke when pushed too hard. Late one evening, after another safe meal and another round of polite lies from advisors, Erys dismissed everyone except Adrian. The room dimmed slightly, privacy fields activating with a soft chime. "They are closer than we thought," she said. Adrian leaned against the table, careful not to touch anything. "They always are," he said. "Plots don't like distance." She studied him, her long ears angled back, a sign of fatigue he was learning to recognize. "If it comes to choosing," she said quietly, "many will expect me to trust the council." "And you won't," Adrian said. "No," she agreed. "I will trust you." The weight of that settled heavily, immediately followed by panic. Adrian laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "That's a terrible idea," he said. "I interrupt banquets." "And yet," Erys replied, "here we are." The palace lights shifted to night mode. Somewhere deep within the court systems, algorithms recalculated loyalties and risks. Adrian straightened, suddenly aware that humor, while useful, would not be enough forever. But for now it kept them breathing. The court did not like being ignored. Adrian discovered this on the 5th day, when invitations began arriving faster than he could decline them. Luncheons, tastings, private discussions, purely ceremonial, all carefully phrased to sound harmless. He declined most on the grounds that he was very busy not dying. The excuses grew thinner. The smiles grew sharper. Queen Erys noticed before he mentioned it. She always did. "They are circling you," she said during a morning meal, her tone neutral as she watched him test a bowl of nutrient broth that insisted on being polite. "That explains the headaches," Adrian replied. "I assumed it was the broth judging me." "It does that to everyone," she said. "Drink." He did, grimacing slightly. "If I start glowing, please consider that a bad sign." The investigation shifted from observation to confirmation. Erys authorized deeper system scans, ones that left faint ripples in the palace's energy flow. Adrian felt them through his implant, a low vibration like distant thunder. He was no expert in court politics, but data was data, and the data was beginning to look uncomfortably familiar. Access logs looping where they shouldn't. Surveillance blind spots that moved depending on who was present. A conspiracy that understood the palace well enough to hide inside it. Adrian started mapping people the way he mapped meals. Who insisted on tradition, who avoided scanners, who laughed too loudly when Erys spoke of safety. He joked about it, because that was easier than admitting he was afraid. "If I disappear," he said one afternoon, "check the dessert spoons. That's where I'd hide." Erys did not smile that time. The evidence pointed upward. Not one conspirator, but several, bound together by shared benefit rather than ideology. A clean transition of power disguised as illness, grief, continuity. Adrian realized with a chill that the plot required patience, not urgency. They had time, which meant they believed they were winning. Erys felt the betrayal more than she showed. In private moments, her composure softened. Her long ears drooped slightly when she thought no one was watching. Adrian found himself staying silent during those moments, which was new for him. Humor had limits. One night, after a meal that tasted like regret and overcooked hope, she asked him, "Why did you shout?" He blinked. "Because I didn't want you to die." "That is not an answer," she said gently. He thought for a moment. "Because everyone else was pretending everything was fine," he said. "And it wasn't. Someone needed to say it out loud." She considered that. "You make the court uncomfortable." "I've been told that's a skill." Their bond shifted then, subtle but irreversible. Less queen and subject, more two people leaning against the same failing structure. Adrian began to see how lonely power was, how every compliment carried a calculation. Erys began to see how dangerous honesty could be, and how necessary. The palace grew quieter, not calmer. Quieter in the way predators grew quiet before striking. Security systems activated layers Adrian had not known existed. Drones nested in the walls. Nanite clouds adjusted air density. Science prepared for violence with impeccable manners. Adrian ate carefully, joked sparingly, watched everything. He realized that if the next attempt came, it would not be subtle. Subtlety had failed. And somehow, despite the fear, he found himself smiling. Because for the first time since arriving, he was not alone in it. The second attempt did not arrive on a tray. Adrian realized something was wrong when the air changed. Not its smell, he had learned that sense lied, but its texture. The palace climate system adjusted itself constantly, micro-correcting temperature and density to suit the queen's physiology. This shift was too abrupt, like a held breath. He stopped walking. Queen Erys took one more step before noticing. "What is it?" she asked quietly. "I don't know yet," Adrian said, which is my least favorite answer. The corridor ahead shimmered faintly as nanite filters activated, invisible systems sliding into place. Adrian's implant lit up with warnings that arrived half a second too late. Neurological interference. Low grade. Elegant. He laughed once, sharply. "Well," he said, "at least this one isn't edible." The guards froze, their suits locking as the palace security AI overrode manual control. Erys did not panic. She never did. Instead, she stepped closer to Adrian, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. Close enough that the corridor's lights dimmed slightly in response. "Can you counter it?" she asked. "I can annoy it," he replied. "That usually helps." He slammed his palm against the wall panel, rerouting power manually. The palace did not like that. Systems protested. The air thickened, then relaxed, the nanite cloud dispersing like embarrassed insects. Somewhere far above them, an alarm tried to decide whether it was authorized. They stood in silence for a moment. "Was that supposed to kill us?" Adrian asked. "Yes," Erys said. "Rude." The palace sealed itself section by section, not with urgency, but with precision. Advisors were locked out. Counselors found their access revoked mid-sentence. The machine had made a decision, and it had chosen her. Or rather, she had chosen. Erys bypassed protocol entirely. She spoke directly to the core systems, issuing commands that had not been used in generations. Adrian watched with a mix of awe and terror as the palace rearranged itself around her will. Science fiction had always promised machines that obeyed. It had neglected to mention how lonely that obedience felt. "You are trusting me an alarming amount," Adrian said as they moved through a corridor that had not existed an hour earlier. "You are still alive," she replied. "This is my metric." Another attempt came that evening, this one quieter. A resonance pulse embedded in the dining chamber's gravity field. Adrian detected it only because his teeth vibrated unpleasantly. "I hate it when physics gets personal," he muttered. They ate anyway. Carefully, deliberately. Adrian tasted, waited, nodded. Safe. The pulse failed, neutralized by a system Erys had quietly adjusted decades ago, just in case. The conspirators were running out of options. "Tomorrow," Erys said softly, "it ends." Adrian swallowed. Violently? Decisively. He considered making a joke. He considered pretending he wasn't afraid. Instead, he said, "Whatever happens, you did the right thing." She looked at him then, really looked at him, her long ears angled back in a way that spoke of vulnerability rather than fatigue. "You do not belong in this court," she said. "I know," Adrian replied, "but it keeps trying to kill me, so now it's personal." The night passed in fragments, security sweeps, data confirmations, the palace thinking faster and faster. Adrian lay awake in quarters that no longer felt temporary, listening to the quiet hum of systems that might save them or betray them. For the first time since the banquet, he did not joke before sleeping. Tomorrow the silence would be intentional. The final banquet was announced as a celebration of continuity, which Adrian thought was a strange way to describe an evening designed to end several careers. The grand hall looked the same as it always had, arches glowing, air humming softly, nobles arriving in carefully measured waves. But the palace beneath it was no longer pretending to be neutral. It watched. It waited. Adrian stood beside Queen Erys, not 3 steps behind this time, but close enough that their shoulders almost aligned. Protocol had quietly adjusted, or been ignored. "You're calm," he murmured. I am finished being patient, she replied. The dishes arrived, familiar in shape, comforting in presentation. Adrian tasted each one, slower than usual, more deliberate. His implant reported nothing alarming. That, somehow, was the most alarming result of all. Safe, he said at last. Queen Erys nodded and lifted her utensil. The hall leaned forward without realizing it. She did not eat. Instead, she set the utensil down and spoke, her voice carrying easily without amplification. Names followed, not accusations, facts. Data projections bloomed into the air, elegant and unforgiving. Access logs, energy transfers, predictive models. The palace itself testified, its systems laying out the conspiracy with machine precision and quiet disappointment. The nobles reacted as people always did when exposed. Some protested, some fled, some froze. Security moved, not violently but efficiently, escorting the conspirators away as if this were merely a scheduling correction. Adrian watched it all with a strange sense of distance. He felt lighter than he had in days. When the last of them was removed, the hall was silent again. But this time, it was a chosen silence. Queen Erys turned to him. "You may eat now," she said. He did and smiled. "Still alive," he reported. "I'm starting to think this job suits me." Laughter rippled through the remaining court, hesitant at first, then real. The tension broke, cleanly, like a snapped wire. Afterward, in a smaller chamber that no longer felt like a hiding place, Erys offered him titles, honors, a permanent position within the court. Adrian listened politely, then shook his head. "I'll stay," he said, "but not as something impressive." She considered that. "As what then?" "As the person who says something when it feels wrong," he replied. "You have enough people who sound certain." Erys smiled openly this time. "Very well." The palace settled into a new rhythm. Systems recalibrated. Trust was rebuilt slowly, carefully. Adrian found himself less nervous, less inclined to joke his way out of fear. When he did joke, it was because he meant it. He had changed. He noticed it one morning while tasting tea that no longer shimmered suspiciously. He was no longer waiting to die. He was paying attention. Queen Erys ruled differently now, more aware of the value of interruption. Adrian walked beside her, not invisible, not elevated, simply present. The celestial court endured. And for the first time since he had arrived, Adrian believed he would too.